Imagine your country strikes gold, and as a direct result, ends up completely dead broke. It makes absolutely zero sense, right? But it's actually a global, proven phenomenon. In today's Explainer, we're diving into the ultimate paradox of national wealth. We're going to look at the hard data to see exactly why human nature is financially toxic, and how one incredibly clever hack completely solved it.
So, let me ask you this. If your country suddenly discovers a mountain of gold, or oil, or copper, should you spend that money immediately? I mean, build schools, pave the roads, cut everyone's taxes. Human instinct just screams, yes, absolutely. But doing that, it is a guaranteed trap. Actually, the most responsible thing a leader can do is lock that money away, even if it makes voters completely furious.
And this right here perfectly captures that exact paradox. Back in mid-2008, the global price of copper, which is Chile's biggest export, was basically going to the moon. We're talking historic highs, over $800 a metric ton. But Chile's president at the time, Michelle Bachelet, flat out refused to spend the windfall. She saved it. And as a result, her approval ratings totally tanked. The public was furious. But then, the 2008 global financial crisis hit, copper prices crashed. And because she saved that money, she had the cash on hand to boost spending and literally save the economy. By mid-2009, her approval rating shot up to 78%.
And that is the core conflict we're looking at today. Saving money during a massive boom makes politicians deeply unpopular in the short term. They get brutally punished by voters for doing the right thing. But surviving a crisis, that makes them absolute heroes later on. The problem is, short-term political survival pretty much always wins out, which is exactly why almost no politician anywhere in the world actually saves the money. See, developing countries face massive economic volatility. When a country wins the resource lottery, capital just floods in. Politicians immediately crank up the spending. They hire more government workers, they build these massive infrastructure projects, you know the drill. But when the boom inevitably ends, they're left holding the bag. Huge debts, bloated payrolls, and a bunch of half-finished bridges. They go bankrupt. Economists actually call this the curse of wealth. To really grasp why this happens, just look at the sheer chaos of copper prices over the last 50 years. I mean, it is a total roller coaster. In the short run, commodity supply and demand are super rigid, so a tiny disruption causes a massive price spike. And this wild volatility creates a temptation that governments simply cannot resist. They convince themselves the high prices will last forever, and they overspend accordingly. Which leads us to the dirty secret of global politics. When researchers looked at official budget forecasts across 33 different countries, they found a massive, undeniable bias. Politicians globally are just pathologically optimistic. 1 year out, official forecasts overestimate GDP by 0.2%. 2 years out, it jumps to 0.8%. 3 years out, it's a staggering 1.5%. They literally lie to themselves just to justify spending like drunken sailors today. Welcome to the optimism trap. On paper, sure, politicians promise these incredibly responsible budgets based on conservative estimates, but reality paints a completely different picture. The data definitively proves that official forecasts are overwhelmingly, systematically, overly optimistic. The political pressure to just spend the windfall right now is simply too high. Human nature fails us every single time. That 1.5% GDP bias 3 years out, that is the smoking gun. It proves that the further into the future governments try to look, the more uncertainty there is. And where there's uncertainty, politicians just fill in the blanks with pure wishful thinking. They predict their deficits are just going to magically disappear. And you can see how this optimism trap is a global epidemic. When comparing 3-year budget forecasts to the actual business cycle, the vast majority of countries systematically overestimate their budgets. And honestly, it gets worse. The data shows this over-optimism peaks right in the middle of economic booms. When times are good, wishful thinking just takes total control of the steering wheel. So this raises a really mind-blowing question. If this is a global, human problem, why did advanced European nations completely fail to control their budgets, while a developing nation like Chile wildly succeeded? I mean, Europe actually had strict legal rules in place. The Stability and Growth Pact literally capped budget deficits at 3% of GDP. That should have fixed it, right?
Well, wrong. The data reveals a pretty shocking truth here. The European countries bound by those supposedly strict rules actually missed their targets the most. These countries systematically cheated their 1-year forecast targets at a higher rate than anybody else. And here is the totally anti-common sense punchline. Relying on rigid rules, like legally demanding a balanced budget, is completely useless if you don't change who makes the economic forecasts. Tell a politician they can't spend money unless they predict growth. And guess what? They won't stop spending, they're just going to lie better. They'll draw whatever lines they need to fit the spending they want.
All right, let's look at Chile's anti-human nature trick, the savings lockbox.
So, how do you fix human nature? Simple. You hack it. Step 1. The government sets a strict structural budget target. Step 2, and this is the absolute genius part, they strip forecasting power completely away from the politicians. Instead, 2 independent panels of anonymous experts estimate the long-term copper prices and economic output. Step 3, politicians are legally forced to adjust their spending to match the experts' numbers. They literally took the checkbook away from the people trying to buy votes. And the craziest part is, it worked beautifully. During the massive boom between 2006 and 2008, actual spot prices for copper went absolutely crazy, but the official Chilean forecasts, determined by those expert panels, stayed incredibly sober. The conservative forecasts acted like an anchor. The experts totally ignored the hype and mathematically forced the government to save the money. Now, it's time for a reality check. We have to look at the whole picture here. We need to aggressively critique the very data that proves this system works. Because we have to ask the hard question, just how difficult is it to forecast these commodity booms, even for the experts? Well, option implied volatility proves that uncertainty absolutely skyrockets when prices soar. Forecasting becomes a total nightmare during a boom. Literally, no one knows if the bubble is going to pop tomorrow or in 5 years. This is exactly why you cannot trust politicians to make these estimates. You need cold, hard, independent data. But getting that data? It's way harder than you might think. Get this. If you look at 30 years of commodity data, it statistically just looks like a random walk. Prices might stay high forever. Researchers calculated that you mathematically need roughly 171 years of historical data just to have the statistical power to prove that commodity prices eventually revert to their mean. Think about that. You need almost 2 centuries of data just to prove that what goes up must come down. Which brings us to the flaws in the study itself. First off, there's a really limited amount of data available because a lot of developing countries basically hide their budget forecasts. Second, like we just saw, you need literal centuries of data to mathematically prove these long-term trends. And third, the volatility data we just looked at only covers the boom years, not the bust years. So the data isn't perfect. We have to acknowledge that.
But look, flaws aside, the core lesson here is undeniable. We cannot expect politicians to just magically be angels. Human nature guarantees they're going to overspend in a boom to win popularity right now. But as Chile proved, we can build systems, we can delegate to independent experts, and we can force governments to act responsibly. It is the ultimate wealth hack. So it leaves you wondering, if a developing nation can successfully hack human nature to save its economy, what's your country's excuse?